I want to thank everyone who watched my last video on I want to thank everyone who watched my last video on the timeline that I set up based on the abomination of desolation. Had a lot of really good feedback. And as you know, I'm not a promoter or hyper. I am a teacher and I'm a researcher. Those are the things I think I do fairly well. And so I had some comments on there that I wanted to respond to. I wanted to try to elucidate for people some of the research that I had done previously and new research that I've done now. So, no hype, let's get into it. All right. So, what I've recommended or what I've suggested is that Daniel 12:11 has not been translated the best. And so the clarity is poor. And I think with a better translation, we can improve the clarity of Daniel 12:11. And so what I propose that we translate Daniel 12:11 and from the time remove or take away the sacrifice, burnt offering or tamid, right here, and to the setting up the abomination of desolation day 1290 or 1290 days. And that would change our understanding of the timeline of how long we might be waiting for Messiah to return. So one of the comments came back at he says like saying from the time I woke up and brushed my teeth 23 and a half hours. But but that's not the way that the sentence of Daniel is structured. Do you see the way that the brushed is before my teeth? You get the verb before the object of my teeth. If you were to retranslate that in the way Daniel does it, it would say from the time I woke up and my teeth were brushed, there shall be 2,300 and a half hours, right? They put the verb after the subject. So, and what he says is, look, it begs the question after 23 and a half hours, then what? What, or do you mean between the time you woke up and you brushed your teeth, you waited 23 hours? Well, first of all, ew, but says no. And he says, no, waking up and brushing your teeth usually don't have a long time lapse between the 23 and a half hours remaining in the day. And so you say until what? But what's at the end of the 2,300 hours or 23 hours? Because you would think that waking up and brushing your teeth were close together, right? So you're not sure. And that's exactly what led me to really research Daniel 12:11 because it doesn't make it clear what's at the end of 1,290 days. It seems a little confusing. And I read all these different theories, and we want to know what the biblical evidence is. If you were to correct this gentleman's sentence of what he put through there, it would be from the time I woke up, see the corrected one, from the time I woke up and to brushing my teeth, 23 and a half hours. But that makes it more clear of what the beginning point and the end point is. And I think in Daniel 12:11, if you correct it and you actually look at it, that it's from the time the burnt offering or the tamid is taken away and to the setting up of the abomination that makes desolate 1,290 days. He was trying to provide an example that of the confusing nature, and I agree. The way that it's currently translated is a confusing nature, and I think what I'm attempting to do, and what I think I'm going to show, and what I have shown, is that this translation actually clarifies what the situation is, and I think it's actually biblical, right? I'm not just trying to make something up, and I want to show you that. I want to show you my research. So the first thing I want to point out is the verb order, and I already kind of mentioned this. So up here, what we have is we have a Hebrew chart, and I'm going to put it up a little bit larger. And you can see that I put the verb. So and the intake is taken away. You can see there's a number 4 by the verb order. So that means that in Hebrew, that word actually came before the regular burnt offering or the tamid. So the verb, but because Hebrew usually puts the verb before a noun, a lot of times in English we will switch it and we'll put the verb after. Okay, no problem, makes sense. But this is the whole word, right? This is number 4, husar, and it's put after. But when we get to the second part of the clause, what we get is that number 7. So the verb over here is put after the noun, okay? But and it's that verb set, or it's right here. It's number 9. But there's also number 8 that's right before it, which is not translated, and we're going to get to that. And number 7. Well, the problem is that in Hebrew, those number 7, 8, and 9 are actually together as one phrase. Like they've separated a phrase and put them separately. Uh, so what that's done is it's created some confusion. And let me show you what I'm talking about. So this is our first problem. So Hebrew is read from right to left, okay? And so this first word up here that's not highlighted is from and from time, and then you have this word husar, which is taken away. And it's the second word. And then you get ha tamid. So you get the sacrifice. But then we get word seven, which is over here, which is the and. It's this little straight up and down with two dots under it. Then you get this lamed with a kamatz underneath, which is the verb point. Um, and so that is number 8, which is not translated. And then you get number 9. So what they've done is they've taken one phrase and they've separated between abomination makes desolate. So actually 2 more words, like taking these 2 tavs, these 2 letters that kind of look like N's in the second highlighted section here, and they've moved it after 2 words, but they've kept the first part, the and before. And so what it's done is it's taken the structure of the Hebrew and it's broken it apart. And it's actually made it more confusing, not less confusing. So that's the first problem. So what I'm saying is that those 2 words should be put back in the proper order. And so we should have and from the time remove or take away the sacrifice, the tamid, and to setting up abomination that causes desolation or abomination that desolates day 1290. By doing that, it actually creates more understanding. It actually creates better flow. Well, it may not create better flow because the verb is still coming before the subject, but it helps us set 2 clauses that helps us understand a time from and a time to. So the first issue is the verb order and the way that the translators broke up the verb order. The second issue we're going to bring up is the phrase. So what we have is this 4-letter phrase with 3 verb points underneath. And it would probably pronounce, I'm not a Hebrew scholar, right? I just play one on YouTube. So it would be Vele Natan. Or you get a Vav, a Lamed, a Tav, and a Tav with the vowel points underneath. So the first letter is a Vav, and it's translated usually and or, and it's a marker of relationship. So most of the time, like you see, there's 42,000 times it's used in the Hebrew manuscripts. 27,000 times it's translated as and. It's also translated as then or but. If you translate it as then, the second most common, that even makes it even more clear. If we translate it with then instead of and, wow, you really get a clarification there. I'm not saying we should do that. I'm not going that far, but I just want you to understand that's how it's translated. The second letter is a lamed. And so the lamed is used, you see 17,000 times. You can see this over here. It's a preposition. It means to or toward, until, or up to. So it's a duration of time. It's a marker of spatial extension towards a goal. This is the James Stevenson Dictionary of Biblical Language. It's used 17,000 times. 6,300 is translated as to. 2,500 is translated as for. But I do want to be fair. There is 239 times it's translated as with. So if it translated as with, you would get from time, remove the tamid, or sacrifice is taken away, and with the abomination of desolation, 1290 days. In that situation, if we translated the lamed as with, it would actually make it less clear, because you would say it's with and you'd ask again, well, then what's at the end of 1290 days? We'd have to ask. But the majority of the time it's translated as to or for or until or something else. But there's over 30 different ways that the lamed, that letter, is translated. It is translated consistently, but there's over 30 different ways that it's translated. The last word, or the last part of this phrase, is this word natan, and it means to be give or be given. It's to place an object or an idea in possession or control of another, right? So we're giving it, we're placing it in control of someone else. what do we have? So I want people to kind of understand the phrase of what we're dealing with. The interesting thing about this word phrase is that it's actually used 7 other times in the Old Testament. I went through and looked at the majority translations that are word for word, or the most, they're trying to be the most accurate. So I pulled up the King James, the English Standard Versions, the NASB, the New Revised Standard Version. Number one, I want to point out that the 2 is a fairly consistent translation. 19 out of 28 times, the 2 is translated to 2. The Lamed is. 25 out of the 28 times, the Lamed is translated totally, right? So out of the 28 times, so the 7 different verses, 4 different types, 25 times the lamed is translated. The other thing I wanted to point out is that the verb is never split from the and. It's never put between the noun phrase or the subject that we're dealing with. It's always put right after and. Every single time, 28 out of 28 times. And so when we do something in Daniel 12:11, we're doing something out of ordinary by splitting the verb to put it after abomination of desolation. Genesis 42:25. But I highlighted them. I want to show you up here. Up on the top, you have the Hebrew phrase, and you get and to give, and to give, and to give, and to give. Boom. All 4. Exodus 32:29. Okay, so now here we get so that he might bestow. So the so is the vav, that is going to be the lamed, and bestow or might bestow is the natan word. In the King James, you get that he may bestow. That is the lamed. The vav is not translated in this situation, but you can still see that the phrase is still kept in the proper verb order. And then you get in order that he may bestow. So in order in this situation is the vav. So it'd be the and that is the lamed and bestow. So you could also say in order that, or and that he may bestow. So you see down here with the NRSV, they kept and so have brought a blessing on yourselves this day. So they actually translate and then so is the lamed. So in all of these 4, the lamed is still translated and the verb is still kept with the lamed or the vav. And then in this one, the vav is intermittently translated. Deuteronomy. And we get, again, and to give up, and to give up, and to defeat. So they translated Natan as defeat in this one for the NASB. And then and to hand, right? And to hand over your enemies to you. Still this idea of giving, of changing possession of something. We still get vav, lamed, verb, natan. Jeremiah 17:10. And you can see once again, we get the phrase highlighted at the top. You see to give, even to give, even to give, and to give. So the 2, the lamed, is translated in every one of those, and the verb is placed right after the 2. The vav is translated in 2 of them and not in the other one. So we get inconsistencies. But if you notice something, even to give is a very reasonable translation. If the ESV had put even to give, I don't think anyone would get all up in arms, right? Or if let's say that the ESV had put and to give, said, I, the Lord, search the heart and test the mind, and to give every man according to his ways, even to give every man according to his ways. The other thing I want to point out here, I didn't highlight it in this one, I'm going to highlight it in a different one, is that the next word has a lamed after it. And you can see that the word to, even to give to each man, to give to all according, the lamed is translated twice there, but other people just drop the 2. And it doesn't really change a huge amount of the meaning. You still get the basic idea. You get the gist of what's going on. And so sometimes, you're like, the 2 is translated, 2's not. But in Daniel 12:11, the 2 actually makes a really big difference. And the verb order makes a really big difference because we're trying to understand this future time frame prophecy. And so by mistranslating it or not translating it well, we're going to actually make it less clear. Jeremiah 19:12. And in this one, I want to point out that we also have a vav and a lamed. Those are in red. And you can see that those are translated and to this one. And then the NASB just does and without the to. But in the previous section, you see how they translate the and and the to. Now, this is one of the situations, though, where they don't translate consistently the to, and you see that in the NRSV. They just says, "Thus will I do to this place," says the Lord, "and to its inhabitants, making this city like Topheth." However, you can do what the NASB did. "This is how I will treat this place and its inhabitants, declares the Lord, so as to make this city like Topheth." It adds a little bit of structure, a little bit of clarity to it. And you have to decide, okay, which one do I prefer reading? But you can see consistently, again, that and is translated, to is translated, but here it's not consistent. This is the one section where it's not as consistent as everywhere else. Okay, so now we go to Ezra 9:8. Again, very simple, and to give, all four. Oh, no, NRSV puts and given. So they do not put, this is one of the places where to is not translated, but the verb is put right after the and. So if you look at the NRSV, it says, "For now, a brief moment, favor has been shown by the Lord our God, who has left us a remnant and given us a stake in his holy place." Okay, so he's given us a stake. It suggests it's still being given from him to us. That's why I like the to here, because, but for now, for a brief moment in the NASB, grace has been shown from the Lord our God to leave us an escaped remnant, and to give us a peg in his holy place. So it's letting us know that he is the one and that it's being given to, right? It's this change of possession. Then we go to Ezra 9:9. Now, this is the last one, and it's pretty busy, but I did a couple of different things on this one. So our yellow is our highlighted word, and you can see that it's and to give consistently, and to give. Okay, I could have just left it at that. However, let us look at the orange. So there's an orange here, and you see there's this lamed that's going on here in both of the oranges. And both the times you see, or you see to us, and the other one here is to grant us, but the lamed is actually there. So it could actually be to grant to us. I put the two in parentheses in the second orange to let you know that that was not translated, but to add the lamed, add the two, actually increases clarity, right? It's letting us know that the granting is being given to, and it's to us. And this is in the red, to grant in the ESV, to give, and to give. There's no vav, so they don't translate it and put and. Our word, our phrase has and to give, but the other one has just to give or to grant. But the and provides a connector in Daniel 12:11. And it helps us understand that it's this phrase. And then just lastly, there's one in purple. Again, there's a lamed in front of another word, and it says to set up, right? To set up, to raise up, to set up. The lamed is in front of these words. See, you see how they're attached. That's what I want to show. They're attached to a phrase, and they're meant to be translated to understand that this change of possession is taking place, that something is being it's to, right? Or in this situation, to give, to grant, to give to us, to us. This is really critical in understanding what's going on. And the fact that they're not translating it in Daniel 12:11, I think is a disservice. So what we find is that 89% of the time, the lamed is translated in the other 7 situations. And 67.8% of the time is translated as to. There sometimes you saw the other words. So so the conclusion I made is that it's consistent to translate the lamed to. This was the research I did before I put my presentation out. So I had done all of this research, but I didn't think people needed to know it. But people brought up questions, and so I thought it was appropriate for me to go through the research that I had already done. but I've done more, and we have a little bit more to go. The second is that even when to is not translated, the verb is never split from the and or the to. So the verb is never split from the vav or the lamed. So the conclusion is that setting up should be placed right after the and. Right? In our Daniel 12:11, the verb should not be placed, the setting up should not be placed after the abomination of desolation. No other times when it was translated was that verb split. So, translating the lamed and putting the verb in the proper location actually brings clarity, and the end point of the 1290 days is made clear. So that we should have, and from time, removing the tamid, and two, setting up abomination that desolates 1290 days. I think it brings clarity. I think, and that's the way that the Bible translators have translated in other locations. That's the way it makes sense. But somebody challenged me with another point that made me go down this another rabbit hole of research, which I loved, and I think it proves the point even more. Before I go to that, though, I have to put one of the other comments is I'd have to follow the preponderance of the evidence and conclude that they, the sacrifices removed, and the abomination of desolation are attached. I mean, that they are attached, but if they're attached at the same time, every other translation is suggesting that, or they're at least making it unclear of what is at the end point. The only one, so whether you do all the top 10 translations, all the top most selling ones, all have the same one. The verb is separated from the and the to is not translated. Every single one of all the top selling top 10. So the NRSV, the New King James, the Christian Standard Bible, the Lexham English Bible, the Message, the New Living Translation, the Amplified Bible, the Holman Christian Standard Bible, the NIV, all have the same translation and weight. So that person's like, yeah, the weight of the evidence, those people are smart. They're brilliant. They would get it. I'm following them. Hey, I mean, that's your choice. That is a decision that we're going to have to make. The only one was the Young's Living Translation. And when I was trying to understand the 1290 days, this is what sent me down that rabbit hole because they translate it and to the giving out of the desolating abomination. And that's what made me go, hey, what's going on here? Which made me dig deeper. Now, somebody brought up something else. Now, he says that, look, what we have here, a way of punctuation is two disjunctive markers. I'm like, disjunctive markers? What are we talking about here? I have never heard of disjunctive markers. So he says, so in Hebrew, when you have those two clauses next to each other with disjunctive markers, then that would mean that the two are related in essence and also in time. And then with the 1290 days, that would be considered what happens next in the sentence or sequence. So I'm like, well, I don't understand what a disjunctive marker is. And I don't like when I don't understand something. So I went and did research. But the two clauses before we move on, and from the time removing the tamid, clause 1, and 2, setting up abomination that desolates, clause 2. He's saying that those two clauses are related in essence and time. I agree. They're related in essence and in time. What the conclusion, though, is one person concludes that they happen at the same time and they're of the same essence. And I say they're at different times, but of the same essence. They're the same kind of thing of what's going on. They're both abominations that desolate. And if you go back, and I mentioned this in my live stream in Daniel 9:27, it says, and on the wing of abominations, which is plural, right? The wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. That word abominations in Daniel 9:27 is plural, which means that there's multiple desolations that they're talking about there. And I think that tamid being taken away is a desolation, but the one that the true abomination of desolation, which is set up, is a desolation, but it's 1290 days later. That's what I'm suggesting. Disjunctive markers. That's the next point. So, what is a Hebrew disjunctive marker? They are accents or punctuation marks that create pauses or divisions within the verse. And they're similar to commas, semicolons in English. They can function as a phrasal division, right? So they can divide groups of words into phrases. showing what should be read together. Okay, so these are the things that should be read together. They can create a structure for your verse. They can also tell you how things should be pronounced. So they can also have what's called a cantillation. So they can also help you pronounce things a certain way. So in Hebrew, they can have a chanting ritual of the way that the Bible is to be read, to kind of chant or kind of follow along. And these disjunctive markers can also tell you that. So they tell you two things. They tell you how a verse or clauses are related to one another, but they're also telling you how things should be read. Now, these special signs or markers showed up in the Masoretic text. The Masoretic text is a 10th century text. Okay. So 10th century Masoretic text came out with the vowel pointings and these disjunctive markers. If you go back into the Dead Sea Scrolls, you get no verb markings or disjunctive markers. You just get the letters. You just get the consonants. So, what they were trying to do, the Masoretes in the 10th century, were to help us understand what words were being said, how they were being pronounced, and how the flow was supposed to be going. So, they had taken all their traditions and they had put those markers in there. So, disjunctive markers are not something that were in the original text, as we can tell, based on the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were something to help, just kind of like chapters and verses, right? In the original writings of Paul and Matthew, there were no chapters and verses. They were there to help break up ideas, break up subjects, and help us define things easier. So there's different types of disjunctive markers, and they look like verbs. They're little marks on the bottom, and they can be associated with various letters. I have the bet here. I put this into Google AI, and this is what came up. And so you can see the different names of the disjunctive markers. And I put a blown up one on the bottom here, and you can see it looks like a little upward kind of pointing arrow. That's a disjunctive marker. Our phrase, the four-letter phrase, the lamed, the one in yellow, has a verb marker. The next letter, the tav there, has a verb marker, the two dots that are next to each other, but that little kind of hook, that little kind of what almost looks like a backwards comma, that's a disjunctive marker. So this word has a disjunctive marker in it. So this person is saying that there's these disjunctive markers that can set up a phrase for us. And this has actually helped me. It's actually, I think, making my case. So we'll see. Let me show you. So the question I first asked was, do any Hebrew disjunctive markers use a lamed? And so, yes, there's 13 times in the Masoretic text that there's a lamed with a specific disjunctive marker. And you can see that over here on the far left-hand side. It looks like two commas that are right underneath the lamed. The one in yellow is our word, and the one far left is the one with the disjunctive markers. But I want you to point out, when I asked this question, it says on the bottom, it says this specialized use in a cantillation mark. So a cantillation mark is how the words to be read and the flow is distinct from the primary function of the letter lamed. Okay, so there's a primary function of the word of the letter lamed. Now, the primary function, it tells us it's the 12th letter in the Hebrew alphabet. Okay, it's the source of the sound, the L sound, but it's also a prepositional prefix meaning two or four. Okay, so the lamed is a preposition. It's just like our letter A, right? It's in our alphabet, but it's also a preposition, and it has no cantillation mark. The next thing we notice that there is a disjunctive in our phrase, but it's not at the lamed. So our disjunctive, our lamed, our vowel has a clear vowel association. So the vav, the first letter has a shav, it's a vowel sign that tells us how to pronounce it. The lamed has a kamatz, and it has another vowel sound, how to pronounce it. The tav has a vowel underneath those two dots side to side, and it has a disjunctive mark called a tifcha or tifka. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Remember, I just play Hebrew on YouTube. Um, but I do try to do my best in terms of research. I may not know how to pronounce it. I may not know how to speak Hebrew, but I do know how to research. Then the next question I asked, Do tipcha markers make two clauses next to each other related in essence and also in time? Because this is the person said that there was two disjunctive markers. And so I asked, does that make them related in essence and time? So this is a type of disjunctive marker. So what was the answer that I got from Google AI? And you can see down on my bottom was the question I asked Google. It says, look, the tifcha or the tifha is not comma in the modern English sense. It functions as a separator in biblical Hebrew cantillation, the way things are pronounced. But it can also serve as denoting a pause. It's a disjunctive trope or separator that can divide a verse into phrases, right? Remember how I said that this 4 letters is actually a phrase. There's actually 3 words here. 2 are prepositions with the vav and the lamed, and then we actually get the word, the verb word. So this is separating this verse, part of a verse, into a phrase. It's not exactly equivalent to a comma in the bold here, right? It's part of the hierarchical system of cantillation marks. Here's the context. It says context dependent. Unlike a standard comma, which is a consistent character, the separating power of a tifcha, can vary depending on the context within the verse. In very short phrases, framed by stronger pauses, its separating function can be neutralized. It divides a longer phrase or clause into smaller, more manageable parts for reading and comprehension. So it's meant to bring clarity. It's meant to be for reading and comprehension. Here's the while tifsha does not explicitly state a temporal or causal link, its placement in the sentence often highlights the grammatical flow and relationship between phrases. Bold sentence. The logical connection between the clauses it separates is determined by the verbal forms and the conjunctions used, not by the tifcha itself. So the verbal form, natan, and the conjunction used. The conjunction we used is and, the vav, and to, well, the conjunction is the vav. The to is a preposition, the lamed. Coordinating conjunctions. So under dot number 2 down under here, the conjunction vav is the most frequent and connects clauses, often indicating a sequence of events. And vav connects clauses, sequence of events, clear. But here's the summary point. The tifcha mark is a structural division within a verse, which guides both the rhythm of the reading, how it flows, how it's going, right? I'm just reading this, or the rhythm of the reading, right? We get a little bit of flow. And the grammatical parsing of the sentence. How is the grammar supposed to be parsed? How do you say a word? Any perceived relationship in time or essence between the clauses it separates is a result of the overall syntax and the word choice, with the tipcha serving to clarify the structure rather than to create the relationship itself. So what they're saying is there's a larger, stronger disjunctive marker. And if that disjunctive marker is there, that will clarify the area more. And that the tifcha is a smaller component to understand a phrase within a larger clause. Do we have that here? Yes, we do. We have a larger disjunctive marker that helps us understand the clause better. So I couldn't just stop at this word. I had to look at this larger picture of what's going on in the entire verse. This is this was fun when I found this. I spent hours trying to understand this. This is the Lexham Hebrew Bio Cantillation Analysis. I didn't even know this existed. This was amazing when I found it. So first of all, we need to understand. I put over here this word together. We all know the word together if you know English. Well, how do you pronounce together? If you are a non-English reader, non-English speaker, do you say together, Together, or do you say together, right? You breaking it up at different syllables. And so by pronouncing it differently, it doesn't sound like the English word that we are used to. Together. We're going to go together. Oh, we're going to go get together. We don't want to get together. We want to go together. So this idea of cantillation is important. When you speak, you're breaking up your words or you're pronouncing them with certain syllable emphasis. And that's what these cantillation marks are for. So that because these phrases are together. So I put in highlight yellow here. That's the vav, lamed, and tav, tav, right? So do you pronounce it all as one word phrase? Is the vav and the tav, vav, the first letter, and the lamed, the second letter, are they pronounced together or are they separated? Well, when you look at the cantillation analysis, what you find is that those two words, the vav and the lamed, are separated from the tav, tav. You see the three arrows coming out of our highlighted word, which lets you know that you're going to pronounce it as vele natan. Vele, and again, I'm not a Hebrew speaker, but each of them have their own emphasis. It's not going to be vele natan, right? It's not putting them together. They have their own sound to them. And this is what the tifcha is pointing to. This is that disjunctive marker is telling us how to speak that phrase, those four letters together. And what we found is when I did the cantillation analysis, there's three other larger cantillation markers within this verse. I've only shown two others. So there's four total that break up this whole verse of Daniel 12:11. But I showed three of them. The first one is the tifcha, which is associated with that little backwards comma that's in our word. The second part is a zakaf katan. I always want to try to do that. Ha. That is a cantillation mark that talks about a larger phrase. So in our sentence here, there is zakaf katan A and B. So from time, removal the tamid. That's one zakaf katan, one phrase. The second phrase or clause is and two, setting up abomination and desolation. That's the second clause. And those two are connected by a stronger disjunctive marker called ha-ha-achna, but it's connected by a stronger one to let you know that those two phrases are connected, that those two phrases are actually getting put together. So the first phrase is a thought, a clause, and the second one is a clause connected by the zakhaf, whereas the athna connects both of those clauses. Why is that important? If you look at two Zahaf Katan phrases, so this is again a Google AI search, I asked the question, what is the relationship between two phrases, these two types of phrases? And what they tell you is in Hebrew, biblical Hebrew cantillation, two consecutive Zahaf Katan phrases have an equal and parallel relationship within a half verse, right? Because this is not the whole verse, because the 1290 days completes the verse. So they have an equal and parallel relationships. The accents establish a sense of balance, dividing the larger segment into two subordinate but distinct logical units. So they're letting you know that this is one unit, this is another unit. They're connected, but they're distinct. The Zahaf Katan is a secondary disjunctive accent. So remember, we had our first one, our tifsha. That one is subservient to the Zahaf Katan, but the Zahaf Katan is subservient to another one. And we saw that in our previous slide. And so this marks a subordinate division within the verse. So this phrase, and to setting up abomination, desolation, is its own phrase. And it's a step below the primary dividers, an achanach, atnach. So when a verse is split by an achanach, the primary divider, multiple sehaf katans can appear within either of the two resulting halves. And we get two. So we get both of them, right? So you could have one clause, just one zehaf katan, but we actually get two. So they have equal division of a clause. When two zehaf katans appear one after the other within the same clause, they function as equally ranked kings. So they're equally ranked. So the first one does not take precedence over the second one. If the second one had not been set up as a zehaf katan, then the first one you could say takes primary precedence. But it doesn't happen that way. They're both considered equal because they're both set up with these disjunctive markers. And so this marks two parallel divisions. The first Zehaf Katan does not take logical priority over the second. This contrasts with other accent relationship where one accent clearly subsumes the weaker one. So the tifcha, the tifcha, is subsumed by the zahaf katan, but the two larger phrases are both equal. So when they're in parallel, they're in part of a larger structure. Finally, in this structure, the two bracketed phrases are grammatically and structurally equal to each other. They function as quarter divisions of the entire verse. The first zahaf katan closes its phrase, but does not modify or dominate the following phrase as the same way a stronger disjunctive would. So what they're saying is that the first section is closed by the zahaf katan, and it does not modify, it's not stronger than or subsume the second phrase. It's not superior to, it's equal. And that's really important when we're trying to understand this. So to say that this one, the first one, they're logically connected at the same time is not supported by the disjunctive markers. The disjunctive markers actually suggest that they are their own separate entities, which is just hopefully you understand that's reinforcing what I'm trying to say. What I've been trying to say all along, that it's from the time that's Tamid is taken away to the abomination of desolation, 1290 days. Let's take a look at this again. Our first Zahaf Katan is the first part of the phrase, which is equal to the second part. It doesn't mean that they're logically connected at the same time. If there had been another Zahaf Katan and there were just the Tifchas, then you could make that argument that, oh, yes, these are happening at the same time. But because they have their own separate strong Zahaf Katans or phraseologies, they are equal. And so you can't make the argument that that has to have happened at the same time. You can make the argument, but you could also make just as strongly the argument that I'm making, which is that they occur at separate times, that they are in essence, they're related, but they're also separate. They're related because they're related by 1290 days, but they're at the ends. One's at the beginning, one's at the end. They're equal. By using the disjunctive markers, it actually supports what I'm saying. It doesn't go against what I'm saying. You can still make the other argument, but I can make the argument just as strongly based on the cantillation analysis. I also want you to notice that every cantillation is translated. Every other word here, every other cantillation is translated. This is and, from, time, taken away, the, tamid, and, the, to, setting up. This one is shakutz. This is abomination. And this is somem, desolation. Everything else is translated except for this one word, to. Now, if we were to look at it in another way, I broke this down. The smaller phrase is called the pashta up on the front. It's from the time the tamid is stopped. There's two pashtas, and they make up a larger zechaf katan. These pashtas represent a medial level disjunction, kind of like our tifsha, signifying a secondary pause within a larger phrase. But it is weaker than a tifcha and often precedes a zachaf katan. So it's actually not as strong as a tifcha. The second part of the phrase, which is also part of its own zahaf katan in blue, its primary role, the tifcha here, is a primary role is to mark the words immediately preceding the two most important disjunctives. So the two most important disjunctives are towards the end of the phrase. So the atna and the sof pasuk, which is the end of the verse. It clearly is showing that these are related, but they're two strong, equally separated and clauses. I think that when I started researching this, I'm like, I need to learn. I try to understand. I think it makes the case just as strongly for what I'm saying. I actually think it makes my case even stronger. I think it actually supports what I'm doing even more. I had done all the other research, right? I had done the to give. I had done the way the verbs were separated and not translating the word to. I had done all that before. But when I studied the disjunctive markers, I was just trying to understand it. Did I make an error somewhere? But when I went and looked at it, I'm going, okay, this doesn't make sense. It makes sense more of what I'm saying. It really supports more of what I'm saying because if you look at it, the way that this is broken up, it's really supporting what I'm saying, that these are two separate times or clauses separated by 1290 days. Now, the other person says, another comment was the word in question in Daniel 12:11, the lemma to is nothing. It doesn't say to or until. I mean, you can make that argument, but I don't think the Bible supports that. I don't think if you look at the Hebrew, it supports whatever. If you're going to say that, that's fine. Then you're not reading the Hebrew. You're not going back through and studying it. Finally, why is the Lamed left out? At first, I thought that maybe there's some grand conspiracy. They were trying to make some type of argument for their end times view. And while I think it does kind of lend towards a certain end time view by having the current translation, I don't think they're trying to do it. I think what I went through and I really studied out when I was studying the disjunctive markers, I started coming up with all these other questions. What I found is the first thing is I went back and looked at the Septuagint. The Septuagint is a Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament done before the time of Jesus. And the Septuagint does not have the word to there. And I use the Lexham Greek English interlineary Septuagint, and the word to is not there. The verb is right after the and, but the word to or the phrase for to is not there. I can't say why that's not the case. But here's an important point. When they went to translate the Old Testament into Latin by St. Jerome, when he went to go translate it, he did not have the book of Daniel in Hebrew. He translated most of the Old Testament using Hebrew. Good on him. Great job. But what I found is that he had to use the Septuagint for the deuterocanonical books such as Daniel and Esther because the Hebrew versions were not available to him at the time. Very interesting. Then the first English Bible, Wycliffe's handwritten Bible, also had to use the Vulgate for the Old Testament. The first Masoretic text, the one that we use today for the Old Testament, the one from the 10th century that has the cantillation marks and the vowel pointings, the first Bible for that was used by the guy after Wycliffe. Anyways, he was the first one to use it. But that's basically, if you're looking at Old Testament translations, that is 1,500 years that it had been translated one way. And if you look at the Latin Vulgate and the way that it's translated, it's very similar to modern translations. The verb is second. And in Greek and Latin, the verb, other order is not as important. It's kind of like English. The verb goes after the subject most of the time. But that's not the case in Hebrew. And we also show that it has the phrase. The other really interesting thing that I found is that the Dead Sea Scrolls does not have Daniel 12:11. So we can't go back and see what the phrase is there. So we don't have it. There's no Aramaic Daniel. So the only Daniel 12:11 we have is from the Masoretic text, but it has the Lamed. And so why was the two left out? I think tradition. I can see Topple, right? Tradition, tradition. Oh, wait. Tradition, tradition. Why do we have it? Tradition, tradition. There. That's my for the day. No, but I think that's probably what it is. It's kind of always been translated that way. And because it has an importance in terms of eschatological function, I think people are hesitant to translate it differently. They've gone through all of the other ones and they've updated it. They have it translated a certain way. But I think with the Septuagint not having it, the Latin Vulgate not having it, and so for the first 1,500 years, the word to was not there, and the verb was being placed afterwards. People just kind of left it that way. That's the majority thing. But I think if you really look at it, it really, to me, suggests that it should be read this way. I think it should be, and from the time removing the Tamid, and 2 setting up abomination that desolates, 1290 days. I think it brings clarity. I think the Hebrew supports it. I think the way we've translated other ways supports it. I think the structure of the verb, I think the word to, the lamed, I think it all supports it. Before we wondered, hey, what's at the end of 1290 days? Maybe it's the abomination, but you can make a case out the other way. But when you put the to in there and put the verb in the proper order, I think it completely clarifies it and tells you exactly what's at the 1200 end of 1290 days, the abomination desolation, which could lead to a massive end time deception. Thank you. I'm Kolan Wright. Peace. Shalom, shalom.